It was a quiet afternoon in the heart of the city. The late-day sunlight stretched across the glass panels of Davis Financial's branch, a small yet refined bank nestled at the intersection of modern energy and nostalgic charm. The automatic doors slid open gently. Footsteps tapped lightly on the marble floor, not hurried, not authoritative, just enough to signal the presence of a modest woman in a soft cardigan and a pair of faded sneakers. Her name was Lena Davis. No one in the bank lobby knew the woman who had just entered wasn't an ordinary customer. She was the founder and the soul behind the creation of the Davis financial system. But today, Lena wasn't arriving as a CEO. No assistant trailed behind her, no packed meeting schedule. She wasn't here to check revenue reports or market forecasts. She had come simply to withdraw $5,000 from her account, a transaction any customer could easily carry out. And she had chosen this branch, one whose location she had personally selected, whose design she had approved, and whose ribbon she had cut on opening day. What Lena didn't expect was that this seemingly uneventful visit would soon reveal a deep crack within the very system she had trusted, and mark the beginning of a seismic reckoning for justice that no one in that room could have foreseen. Lena approached the teller counter. The atmosphere was quiet. A young woman sat behind the desk, eyes glued to the computer screen, not once lifting her head to acknowledge the customer. Lena cleared her throat gently. "Hello, I'd like to withdraw money from my account," she said, her voice soft but clear. The young woman, her name was Sophie Matthews, still didn't look up. She simply pushed a transaction form toward Lena and replied curtly, "Fill this out." No eye contact, no greeting, not a shred of courtesy. Lena remained silent. She didn't react, didn't make a scene. She filled out the form quickly. Name, account number, withdrawal amount, $5,000, an amount that required identification, but not one that would raise any red flags. She slid the form back, along with her ID. The moment Sophie glanced at the information, the air seemed to shift slightly. Her eyes darted between the form, the ID card, and Lena. Then, without a word, she stood up abruptly and walked into the back office with the documents, not explaining. Lena stood alone. Her hand rested on the counter, fingers tapping lightly on the marble, not out of impatience, but to maintain composure. She was used to skeptical looks, used to being judged for the color of her skin, her curly hair, or her lack of flashy brand-name accessories. But this was her bank. The place Lena had poured her sweat, tears, and faith into for nearly 2 decades. Minutes later, the manager's office door opened. Sophie returned, but not alone. With her was a man in a crisp shirt, neatly combed hair, a face marked by tension and a forced politeness. His name was Brad Sullivan, the branch manager. "Hello, Ms. Davis," Brad said, attempting a courteous smile. "I understand you'd like to make a withdrawal." "Yes, from my account. The amount is $5,000, Lena replied, maintaining her composure. Brad frowned slightly, inspecting her ID more carefully, then held it under the light for verification. Lena began to sense the underlying suspicion in the air, not because of the verification process itself, but because of the way they were looking at her. Like a stranger, as if she didn't belong there. Brad looked up and asked, "What do you do for a living, Ms. Davis?" Lena tightened her grip on the strap of her purse, her voice no longer as gentle. "I run a bank," she replied curtly. Brad glanced at Sophie, then continued, "Is this account personal or business-related?" Lena took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. "I wrote it clearly on the form. It's a personal account." There was no more doubt in her mind. This was no standard procedure. This was a test. An evaluation not based on paperwork, but on appearance, on skin color, on bias. And the worst part was, it was happening in the heart of a system she had built with her own hands. The air inside the Davis Financial Bank lobby had grown thick and heavy. Glances began shifting toward the teller counter, where Brad Sullivan, the branch manager, still held Lena Davis's ID under the light, turning it over and over as if it were evidence in a fraud case that needed meticulous investigation. But what he was inspecting wasn't the paperwork. It was the presence of a modestly dressed black woman. A woman Brad simply couldn't believe could be the owner of a bank. "I need to verify a few more details before we can proceed with the transaction," Brad said, his tone polite yet rigid, as though reciting lines memorized from a customer service training course, one that had conveniently forgotten the most important principle, respecting human beings. Lena met his gaze with calm resolve. You have my ID. You have the form, the account, and the transaction history if needed. What more information do you require? Brad hesitated, partly because he had no reasonable answer, and partly because he hadn't expected the woman in front of him to remain this composed for so long. Ms. Davis, is this your first time conducting a transaction at this branch? He asked, eyes scanning her for a reaction. Lena could hardly believe her ears. She had opened this very branch, approved every carpet, every teller desk design, every budget line for the security system installation. And yet here she was, being questioned by a subordinate as though she were someone who had just wandered in off the street. I've conducted transactions here since day one, before you even received your job offer, Lena replied, her voice steady but edged with warning. Sophie, the teller, stood behind them, her composure beginning to crack. She glanced at Brad, silently asking, should we keep going? But Brad didn't care. He pressed on as if he had been handed the authority to protect a system, one he had no idea who actually built. You say you work in banking. What exactly is it that you do? Brad asked, this time more bluntly. Lena pressed her lips together. This question wasn't about job clarification anymore. It was an implicit denial of her worth. I don't work in banking, Lena answered, her tone now cold and precise. I run a bank. Davis Financial is my bank. The statement dropped like a chess piece slammed onto the board, clear, final, indisputable. Brad faltered. A flicker of hesitation passed over his face, but he still kept the same rehearsed tone. I need to confirm whether this is a personal or business account. Lena frowned. It's marked on the form as a personal account. If you have eyes, you'll see it. Each word Lena uttered now was no longer a reply. It was a strategic strike, intelligent, composed, but piercing. Brad didn't back down. He flipped the form over, rotated it vertically, horizontally, as if trying to catch an error on a flawless sheet of paper. But there was no error, only a baseless suspicion taking hold of a man's reasoning, a man unaware that his every move was digging his own professional grave. Lena stood there still, but her presence rising by the minute. This was no longer a withdrawal. This was a silent trial of her existence in a space she had once built with her youth, through every contract, every loan negotiation, every late-night strategy call. And now, the very place that once hailed her as the pioneer was forcing her to prove she had the right to stand inside it. Brad looked up again, this time with a question that crossed every line. Can you tell me the last amount you deposited into this account? Lena nearly stopped breathing. A brief moment, sharp as a blade, sliced through her heart. You're testing me over $5,000, aren't you? She asked, slow and cutting. While I'm the one who signed off on the entire operational budget of this branch. No one answered. No customers dared whisper. No staff member moved. The room stood frozen. But you have full access to all my data. So why are you asking me for something you could verify with a single click? Brad looked momentarily flustered, but he didn't stop. We need to verify the information to ensure security, he repeated mechanically, like a parroted line from a handbook. But this time the words carried no weight. Lena narrowed her eyes. Security for whom, Brad? For the bank? Or to suppress customers you deem not typical? Her voice wasn't loud, but it struck like a slap across the suffocating quiet of the room. Brad shifted uneasily, his eyes darting around the lobby, where customers had started to take notice, no longer avoiding, pretending not to hear. Some looked confused, others startled, but all of them understood. They were witnessing something unusual. Lena reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. No warning, no sound. She turned on the camera, pointed it directly at Brad, and began to speak, not hurriedly, not angrily, just the truth. A truth so clear no one could deny it. My name is Lena Davis. I am the founder and CEO of Davis Financial, this bank. I built it with my own two hands, back when it was just an idea on a blank sheet of paper. Brad stood frozen. His eyes flickered. Today, I came here as a customer to withdraw a small amount from my account. I brought all the proper documentation. But instead of being served like anyone else, I was asked for more information, questioned about my profession, and had my ownership of the account doubted in the very system I created. A beat of silence, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room, each word squeezing tighter around them. This is not protocol. This is prejudice. This is discrimination. And now I will make sure everyone sees. It's time the entire system knows what's happening inside my branches." Brad opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. The confidence he once wore now cracked like old paint. Behind him, Sophie, the young teller, lowered her head, face flushed, fingers gripping the counter as if to stop herself from trembling. Lena turned the camera toward Sophie. "You saw my name. You saw the account. And you still chose to ignore me. Why?" Sophie murmured, barely audible. I was just following procedure." Lena didn't scold her, but her gaze alone kept Sophie from lifting her eyes. "Procedure? I wonder if I were wearing a suit, had a different skin tone or straight hair, would your procedure still look like this?" Just then a sharp beep sounded from beneath the teller's desk. Brad had just pressed the security call button. His final mistake. The door at the back of the bank opened. A tall man in a security uniform entered, his eyes scanning the room. He began walking toward Lena slowly, one hand hovering near his belt, as if he'd been summoned to deal with a threat. But Lena didn't back down. She held her head high, turned the camera toward the guard, and asked, "Can you tell me why you were called here?" The guard hesitated. "I was just told to assist with a situation." "What situation? Has anyone yelled? Caused a disturbance? Or is this just about a black woman requesting to withdraw money from her account?" The entire lobby fell dead silent. Lena turned back to Brad, whose face had now gone pale as ash. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. But every word she spoke was a blade slicing into the myth of a fair process they so proudly touted. "Why did you call security, Brad? To intimidate me? Control me? Or was it just to protect your ego from the fact that the woman you thought didn't belong owns this place?" Brad stood frozen. Nothing left to say, nothing left to hide. The mask had fallen. And in front of everyone, the truth had been laid bare. The room seemed to hold its breath. As Lena Davis, wearing simple sneakers and a soft cardigan, stood in the middle of the bank lobby, her voice remained calm. Not loud, not trembling, but powerful enough to render every other sound around her unnecessary. The silence of those who had doubted her was now the clearest proof of the truth. Brad Sullivan, the branch manager, remained behind the counter, his hand gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles turned white, as though letting go would cause all his authority to shatter like glass. Beside him, Sophie, the teller, kept her head bowed, her eyes avoiding contact. And the security guard who had been summoned? He now took a step back, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes shifting between Lena and his manager. Lena turned back to her phone and stopped recording. Not because she was afraid, but because she had recorded enough. Enough to force the system to respond. Enough to make those who chose to look away realize the time for silence was over. She drew a deep breath, then slowly stepped toward the counter. Her hand reached for the ID card still lying there, the same card Brad had examined as if it were forged. She picked it up, held it toward him. "Take a good look at it again, Brad." Brad reluctantly looked down. The print was crystal clear. Lena Davis, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Davis Financial Group. She said nothing more. She didn't have to. A flicker of panic crossed Brad's face, not because he feared losing his job, but because he realized he had just committed the irreparable, humiliating the very person who gave him his position. "What was I waiting for, Brad?" Lena asked, her voice firm but not raised. "An apology? An explanation? Or just a fair look, the kind you've offered so freely to others?" Brad opened his mouth, perhaps to say something, but Lena raised her hand, gently cutting him off. "Don't. Whatever you say now is already too late." She turned to face the customers in the lobby, those who had remained silent from the start, but now, not a single one could look away. She didn't blame them. She just looked through the eyes of someone who once believed in people, who had given chances and now had received a bitter lesson in return. Lena turned to stand in the center of the room and spoke. "I founded this bank with one simple belief, that every person deserves respect, regardless of what they wear, where they come from, or how they look. I didn't build Davis Financial to enrich myself. I built it to tear down the invisible walls that traditional banking had long erected. But today, right here, those walls have returned." The room stayed silent. "I don't need to withdraw $5,000, Lena continued. "I need to withdraw the truth from the way you've chosen to run this place." Brad's voice shook. I'm sorry." "No, Lena interrupted. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to every person who's ever been silently dismissed, ever been doubted just because they didn't fit the ideal customer image you had in your head. Apologize for forgetting that working in a bank isn't about judging people. It's about serving them fairly. She turned to the security guard. And you? When a woman stands alone in the lobby, not yelling, not causing a scene, you approached with your hand near your belt. What were you trained for? Protection or intimidation? The guard flushed. He lowered his head, said nothing. Lena turned back toward the counter. Her final look went to Sophie, the first person who had refused her. You're young. You still have time to change, but only if you're brave enough to look at what you did today and ask yourself, if I weren't the CEO, if I weren't the founder, where would I have ended up? Out of this bank, or out of the right to be seen as a human being? A single tear slid silently down Sophie's cheek, but Lena didn't stop to comfort her. She had walked long enough in restraint. Now was the time for the system to feel the weight of her disappointment. She walked out of the bank. No money withdrawn, no turning back. But just beyond that glass door, the storm had already begun to brew. 3 hours later. Headquarters, 16th floor conference room. Lena sat at the center of a glass-walled boardroom. 12 regional directors appeared on the screen in a live video meeting. Each of them had watched the clip Lena had sent earlier, the footage capturing every second she had been questioned, doubted, and discriminated against, within the very empire she had built. One voice spoke up first. CEO Davis, I can't believe what I just saw. Lena didn't need to reply. Her face was the answer. Neither can I. The next day an internal announcement was issued. Brad Sullivan was immediately dismissed. Sophie Matthews was placed under special review. A mandatory training program on unconscious bias and discrimination in customer service was rolled out across the entire system. A full quality audit of all branch service practices was launched. Timeline, 60 days. An anonymous reporting system was activated, allowing staff and customers to report any discriminatory behavior or abuse of power, without fear of retaliation. Lena said nothing more. She didn't have to. Because her actions that day were a silent declaration, one that forced an entire system to look inward, not with slogans, not with rage, but with truth. Some people build empires, not to stand above others, but to stand among them, to listen and protect. And there are days when even they must speak up, not to hold on to power, but to defend the values of what they've created. 3 days after the incident at the Davis Financial Branch, a phone-recorded video less than 2 minutes long was uploaded to social media. It opened with the image of a black woman standing in the middle of a bank, her voice calm but unwavering. My name is Lena Davis. I'm the founder of this bank, but today I was asked to prove I had the right to exist here. In less than 24 hours, the clip had garnered over 5 million views, going viral with the hashtags, "Itty, this is my bank too." Respect has no dress code. Lena Davis deserves. Better the media swarmed in. The headlines exploded across every major platform. CNN. CEO suspected inside her bank. A shameful tale of modern racial bias. Washington Post. It wasn't the paperwork. It was the lack of a suit. So what really defines professionalism? BuzzFeed. Lena Davis's story isn't about withdrawing cash. It's about how we judge each other. At breakfast tables, in office break rooms, on buses, even in college lecture halls, people began to talk. A middle-aged mother in Atlanta posted on Facebook. My daughter's a senior studying finance. She asked me, Mom, if I run a bank one day, will I also have to prove I'm trustworthy like Ms. Lena? I didn't know what to say. A white man in Denver commented, I've worked in finance for 22 years. If someone like Lena Davis gets questioned, I wonder how everyday folks are being treated without us ever knowing. Davis Financial fell into a public relations crisis, even though the board of directors swiftly took internal measures such as terminating Brad Sullivan, placing Sophie Matthews on temporary suspension, issuing a system-wide operational review. The public outrage didn't subside, because the problem wasn't Brad, it wasn't Sophie. It was a much larger question. Are we living in a society where human worth is defined by clothing, skin color, and job titles? And Lena? She didn't give interviews, didn't go on television, didn't post long social media statements. She chose silence, but not inaction. 1 week later, Lena sent an internal memo to every staff member, from regional directors to doormen. I don't need pity, I need everyone to reflect. I wasn't hurt because I couldn't withdraw $5,000. I was hurt because the trust I placed in each of you was met with doubt. If I, the founder of this bank, can be denied because of how I look, how many customers have walked away in silence, offended, and we never even noticed? The letter ended with a directive. Every branch must host a reverse experience day, where managers and regional directors are required to pose as regular customers for an entire day. No revealing their identities, no name badges, no uniforms, just an unfiltered experience of how their staff truly treated people. Initial reactions. Many were skeptical. Some executives chuckled behind closed doors. Just emotional fluff. A publicity stunt to calm the storm. It probably won't change anything. But once the program began, things changed in ways no one expected. At a Chicago branch, branch director Jeffrey Cole disguised himself as a homeless man. Messy hair, ragged clothes, holding a small check to cash. A teller eyed him from head to toe. "This check looks fake," she whispered to a colleague, unaware the internal mic system was still recording. Jeffrey was turned away, not for any concrete reason, but simply because the transaction didn't feel valid. When he walked out of the branch, no one knew they had just denied their boss. At the New Orleans branch, regional director Carla Benson posed as a black housewife attempting to open a savings account. The teller asked for additional proof of income, even though the bank's policy did not require it for new accounts. Carla was politely dismissed, with gentle words, but unmistakable condescension. She walked away. 2 days later, the entire branch was summoned. The employee in question was immediately suspended. The change had begun. Customers started coming back. Employees grew more mindful, not out of fear of hidden cameras, but because they had felt what it meant to be underestimated. And Lena. She still didn't appear in public. She did only one thing: listen. She listened to stories from employees. She read every customer feedback form. And most importantly, she kept her promise that this change would be more than temporary. 1 month later, Davis Financial became the first bank in the region to implement a system for reporting discrimination from both staff and customers, introduce rewards for branches rated most kind and fair by customers, publicly display complaint statistics per branch, no longer hiding behind polished reports. What seemed like a scandal meant to embarrass Lena Davis instead became the spark that began cleansing the entire system. And when the media asked to interview her, to praise this brave woman, Lena simply smiled and said, "I don't want to be celebrated. I just want the next person after me to never have to speak up again." When the video of Lena Davis went viral across social media, no one, not even she herself, could have predicted that a brief exchange at a teller counter would trigger such a powerful ripple effect. But then 1 week passed, then 2, and the wave didn't stop. Major banks across the country began to feel the pressure. Davis Financial, once a modest local brand, was now featured in every article, podcast, and panel discussion on equality in the financial sector. A veteran journalist from NPR observed, "Lena Davis's story forces the banking industry to stop treating bias as an isolated incident. It's a mirror held up to the entire system." In Washington, D.C., a closed-door meeting was held. In a quiet room at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, Director Dana Whitaker watched Lena's video for the 3rd time. Her eyes stayed fixed on the image of the black woman standing alone in a bank, simultaneously questioning and introducing herself as the founder. Dana placed her hand softly on the table. "Bring her to Washington," she told her aide, not to praise her, to listen. 3 days later, a formal invitation was sent. The message was simple. "Dear Ms. Davis, CFPB invites you to Washington to discuss reforms in our oversight policies concerning bias in the financial industry. We believe your experience and insight offer a critical perspective that no statistic can convey." Lena read the letter in silence. She wasn't surprised. She knew that once the truth was clear enough, change becomes inevitable. Back at Davis Financial, things were shifting, day by day. Reports of discriminatory behavior dropped by 42% within a month. Customer satisfaction among black clients doubled. Employees who once worked in silence now proactively reported injustices. But for Lena, true success wasn't measured in numbers. It was captured in an email she received from a single mother in Georgia. "I was once denied a loan because of insufficient credit history. even though I'd never missed a payment. After your story, I went back, and for the first time, someone listened to me. Lena read the email and placed a hand over her heart. No award could compare to those words. The day Lena arrived in D.C., her car glided quietly through the tree-lined streets of the capital. No press, no reporters, no fanfare. Because those who truly change the world don't need a stage. At CFPB headquarters, Dana Whitaker rose to greet her with a handshake. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," Lena replied, her voice soft but resolute. The meeting began. Around the table sat sharp, well-dressed figures, lawmakers, behavioral finance experts, senior policy advisors. The first to speak. "Ms. Davis, please tell us, what is the greatest flaw in the current system?" Lena paused for a moment, then answered, "We build processes, but allow people to run them with bias. We claim to be fair, but no one confronts the prejudice employees carry into each transaction. The failure isn't in the paperwork, it's in the perception. How we decide who's a worthy customer." The room fell silent. One financial expert opened a notebook and began writing every word. Dana nodded slowly. "If you had the power to rewrite just one regulation overseeing the banking industry, only one, what would it be?" Lena didn't hesitate. "I'd require every bank to publicly disclose a fairness score as part of their quarterly report. Not just about dollars, but about how they treat people." A simple idea, but no one had dared to propose. After the meeting, Dana walked Lena slowly down the hallway. "I have to ask this," Dana said, glancing toward the Inspector General's office. "If Congress created a special advisory role for nationwide financial reform, would you consider accepting it?" Lena froze, not out of surprise at the offer, but at the emotion stirring inside her. Part of her wanted to say no, because she didn't want to leave Davis Financial. Her heart was rooted there. But another part, the part that had been questioned at the teller counter, whispered, "It's time to take this fight further." Lena turned to Dana. "I'll think about it," she said. "But if I say yes, I'm not coming to be a symbol. I'm coming to bring change." Dana smiled. "That's exactly why we need you." Back home, Lena sat by the window of her office. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a golden hue across the quarterly report she had just reviewed. She thought about Brad Sullivan, the manager who had doubted her. She thought about Sophie, the young woman who had lowered her head in shame. And she thought about herself, that day in the bank lobby, with no one beside her, no title, no protection of prestige. Only a human being standing for dignity. Lena's fight didn't end the day she walked out of that bank. It had only just begun. And what moves people to change isn't rage. It's the moment they see themselves in someone else's story. On a Monday morning, just 2 weeks after Lena returned from Washington, an urgent call came in from Davis Financial's finance department. "We have a problem," said the CFO bluntly. Lena set her teacup down, her voice calm. "Who's pulling capital?" There was a pause on the other end. Then came the name, Evermont Equity Group. Evermont, a name that would make any executive tread carefully. As one of the largest private equity firms in the United States, Evermont held an 18% strategic stake in Davis Financial. Not enough to control the company, but enough to sway every major decision. And now, they had made their position clear. "We no longer have confidence in CEO Lena Davis's leadership direction due to the reputational and social risk stemming from the recent incident." No questions asked, no meetings requested. Just a cold email stating that they would withdraw their entire investment within 14 days unless there was a change in public communication strategy and internal equity policies. In other words, if Lena didn't change how she ran things, they'd pull the plug. The executive board was divided. Half stood with Lena, believing the path she was on wasn't just right for the bank, but for the entire community. The other half, nervous and afraid. "We can't afford to lose Evermont. If they leave, the stock will crash. We'll be acquired by a competitor." And then one board member finally said what everyone else had been thinking, but hadn't dared to voice. "Lena, would you consider stepping aside, temporarily, until things calm down?" The room went heavy, frozen. Lena wasn't surprised. She had seen this coming. Because in a world where money rules everything, doing the right thing is often the most expensive move you can make. She stood up without looking at anyone. "Schedule me a meeting with Evermont. In person." 3 days later. Evermont headquarters, New York City. 42nd floor boardroom. Glass walls overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Across the table sat three sharply dressed men, not brash, not loud, but with eyes colder than any contract Lena had ever signed. The one in the center, Derek Vaughan, managing director of the fund, spoke first. "Ms. Davis, we deeply respect what you've accomplished. But Davis Financial is no longer a boutique operation. It's a financial institution with thousands of shareholders, and your public statements, policies, and actions are creating division." Lena offered a faint smile. Division between what exactly? Profit and principal? Derek didn't answer. He leaned forward, his tone lower. "We're not asking for your resignation. We're simply proposing a temporary step back from executive operations while PR handles the fallout. Then you return. We all win." But Lena knew better. This wouldn't be temporary. If she stepped aside, someone else would take her place. And when she returned, everything she'd built, reverse experience day, the bias reporting system, every policy, would be quietly dismantled. Everything. Gone. She raised her chin, her eyes locked onto Derek's. "I didn't build Davis Financial to appease people who don't believe in equity. I built it so that if my daughter walks in one day, she'll be treated with dignity, not because she carries the Davis name, but because she deserves it." Derek arched an eyebrow. "That's a noble ideal. But ideals don't pay dividends." Lena nodded. "And Evermont is free to divest. But let me be clear, I will not step down." She stood, picked up her bag. At the door, she turned back. "If losing 18% equity is the price of preserving a company's integrity, I'm willing to pay it." Hours later, Davis Financial's internal alarm rang. Evermont issued an official notice. They would withdraw all capital within 10 days. Stock prices dipped. Media outlets pounced. Small investors began to sell. Shares dropped 8%. The financial pressure began to build. That evening at Lena's home, she sat alone in the living room. The space was quiet, save for soft jazz humming from a speaker. She flipped through pages of financial reports. Underlined branches at risk. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Only one thing burned brighter than ever in her eyes. Resolve. Because this wasn't just a fight to keep a bank alive. It was a fight to protect its soul. When you dare to say no to financial power, you're not just resisting a decision. You're resisting an entire belief system, one that claims morality is optional, when in truth it should be non-negotiable. 3 days after Evermont officially announced its divestment, Davis Financial began to waver. Though not yet facing a liquidity crisis, the market had started reacting. Small shareholders grew anxious. Potential investors became hesitant, and the media couldn't stop probing into the internal war between principle and pragmatism. On a CNBC financial segment, the anchor half joked, half serious. Lena Davis might be the moral reformer banking needs, but can she keep the bank afloat through this storm? Wednesday morning, 8:15 a.m. Lena had just stepped into her office when her assistant, Carla, knocked gently, an uncertain look on her face. "Someone's here to see you. No appointment. He says he's an old friend of Davis Financial." Lena looked up. "Who is it?" Carla stepped aside. A tall, lean man in a charcoal gray suit stood at the door. His eyes deep, his smile subtle, just enough to inspire trust, but not familiarity. Thomas Ralston, former Chief Strategy Officer of Davis Financial. He had once stood by Lena during the bank's earliest growth stages, before leaving to pursue greater opportunities, more precisely, leaving to join Evermont. Thomas sat down, not casually, but deliberately. "Just like old times," he said, glancing around the room. "Jasmine tea, wooden bookshelves, and still no diplomas on the wall." Lena didn't smile. "I don't need to prove anything in my own space." Thomas nodded. "I'm not here as your former colleague, not as Evermont's representative. I'm here as someone who once believed in you." Lena didn't respond, but her eyes flickered. She hadn't forgotten. Thomas was the first to believe she could build a bank founded not on bias, but on values, and also the first to pull out his equity and leave, when Davis Financial went national. Thomas exhaled. "I've seen the entire press conference, the video, and how you handled Evermont. Honestly, I didn't think you had it in you. Then you never really understood me. No, Thomas replied. I understand you perfectly, but I also understand the price of ideals. He paused. I'm here to offer a way out. Lena tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharpening. Let's hear it. Thomas opened his leather case and slid a file across the table. On the cover, Unity Capital Alliance, a name she didn't recognize. An independent investment group. No ties to Evermont. Long-term vision. Social impact driven. And more importantly, they're willing to fully replace Evermont's capital, possibly even increase it. Lena didn't move. She waited for him to continue. They only ask one condition. You remain CEO, continue your reforms. But all public communications, press, media, social dialogue, must be overseen by their strategic council. You'll no longer speak unilaterally. All statements require approval. Silence. Lena didn't answer right away. She stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched below her, banks, offices, streets, all running like nothing had changed. But she knew. Behind that peaceful image, millions of people face discrimination daily, whether intentional or unconscious. And if her voice was silenced, who would speak for them? Thomas, she said, still facing away, do you believe in what I'm doing? I believe in you, Thomas replied. But I also know that if this bank collapses, everything you stood for will just become a story in a TED Talk. It was a brutal truth, and an accurate one. Lena turned to face him. And if I stay silent, then what I've done will be nothing more than a negotiation between dignity and dividends. The turning point had come. She didn't need more time. She picked up the file, slid it gently back across the table. Thank you for coming back, but I won't trade my voice for capital. Thomas sat quietly. Not angry, not disappointed, just a heavy stillness in his eyes. He knew. The woman who once held meetings in a cramped room with cheap tea. It was still the same, unyielding, uncompromising. He stood, nodded once. If you ever need me, I'm here. The door closed behind him. 1 hour later, executive boardroom. Lena entered, holding the Unity Capital file in her hands. All eyes were on her, anxious, expectant. She placed the file in the center of the table. I'm rejecting this offer, and I'm rejecting any proposal that seeks to control my voice under any form. A financial director jumped up. Lena, we're at risk of missing next quarter's liquidity target. I know, she said, but I didn't build this bank to keep it alive at any cost. I built it so it would live for the right reason. She looked around the room. If you stay, thank you. If you leave, I understand. No one moved. No one left. Because even without saying it, they all knew. They had just witnessed something rare in the world of finance, a person placing belief above money. Leadership isn't just steering the ship through storms. It's having the courage to say no to a golden compass, when it leads you, of course, from what's morally right. The night Lena turned down the investment offer from Unity Capital Alliance, she returned home later than usual. The New York sky was pouring rain. Her 27th floor apartment was quiet, filled only with the sound of wind whispering against the glass windows. Lena sat in front of her computer, opening her email to check the messages that had piled up after another turbulent day. And then she noticed something strange. Her inbox was flooded with subject lines that echoed the same message. I switched my account to Davis Financial because of you. Thank you, Lena. I chose the bank that chooses kindness. We support you, with action. She clicked open the messages. Each email carried a story. A single father from Michigan wrote, I was denied a car loan because I didn't have a previous debt history, but I've never missed a payment. When I heard your story, I realized I wasn't alone. Today, I moved all my savings to Davis Financial. A teacher in San Diego said, I don't have much money, but I want my daughter to grow up knowing we can choose where to place our trust. An Asian American student shared, I just received a scholarship, and I didn't choose the biggest bank. I chose the one that respects people. The next morning, Davis Financial headquarters. Carla, Lena's assistant, rushed into the office, her face a mix of shock and excitement. Lena, you need to see this. On the large screen was a viral post on X, formerly Twitter. Bank with Davis. Over 40,000 new accounts opened in 24 hours. Beneath the post were photos of users from all walks of life, homemakers in Texas, students in Boston, even white entrepreneurs in Seattle. All shared why they had left their old banks and joined Davis Financial. No one had been asked. No one was paid. It was a movement, born from the heart. Lena was stunned. She didn't cry. But her eyes lit up, not from triumph, but because she saw something she had long feared was gone. Hope. She stood up and walked out. I want to meet with the entire customer service team. Now. Customer operations, 5th floor. 40 staff members filled the room. They had all heard the news. They knew what was coming. Starting today, Lena said, we're no longer just a bank. We're the choice of people who want to believe that finance can be fair. It won't be easy. The system will be overloaded. Mistakes will happen. But I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to care. Applause erupted, not staged, not prompted. It came from people who suddenly realized they were now part of something bigger than themselves. Within 72 hours, Davis Financial opened over 120,000 new accounts. The banking infrastructure required emergency upgrades. Customer support lines went 24/7. Branches were overwhelmed by walk-ins. The media dubbed it America's first conscience-driven financial migration. A Forbes editor wrote, in an era of collapsing public trust in financial institutions, Lena Davis has done the unthinkable. She's earned trust, not with marketing, but with meaning. But with light comes shadow. Competing banks began silent smear campaigns. Davis Financial's website was hit by a DDoS attack. A fake Lena Davis account surfaced on social media, spreading distorted versions of her story. Conservative news outlets accused, Davis Financial is exploiting racial tension for profit. Can a CEO led by emotion sustain a national banking operation? Lena didn't argue back. Instead, she hosted her first live stream since the incident, lasting exactly 9 minutes and 18 seconds, the same length as the original video showing her being interrogated at the teller counter. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She spoke with calm, steady resolve. I'm not asking anyone to leave their banks. I'm simply saying if you've ever been looked at with doubt, treated like a threat because of your appearance, gender, or language, then Davis Financial will be a place where you won't have to prove you're worthy. Over 12 million views in 48 hours. And the number of new accounts kept growing. But now the real challenge began. The growth was too fast. The technical team was stretched thin. A 3-hour maintenance failure locked out over 8,000 customers. Online questions emerged. I support Davis Financial, but is this system strong enough to serve millions? The executive board called an emergency meeting. An IT director warned, if we don't invest aggressively in infrastructure right now, a major crash is just a matter of time. And that meant spending the exact kind of money Lena had refused from investment funds. Lena now faced a new choice. Continue alone, slowly, and risk collapse from sheer volume. Or bring in a new partner, but share some decision-making power, and potentially dilute the vision she had built. She stood before the whiteboard in the strategy room, pen in hand, eyes fixed on the 3 words written at the top of the meeting. Ethical growth matters. When you fight to build a just system, the crowd might come to support you. But to keep them, you need more than goodness. You need wisdom, discipline, and clarity in every step you take. The whiteboard in the strategy room still bore the same 3 words. Ethical growth matters. Lena stood silently. On the table were 4 proposals from new investors, all willing to inject capital in exchange for partial oversight of tech infrastructure and media strategy. No terms as aggressive as Evermont's, but none were completely unconditional either. Across from her, the CTO and head of operations waited. Their eyes held everything: expectation, concern, and deep respect for the woman who had led them through days no one thought they'd survive. Lena turned toward the tall window, looking out at the rain-drenched city. Every drop falling outside was a person who had once felt invisible in a system meant to serve them. And now hundreds of thousands of those people were placing their trust in her, not because she was CEO, but because she had dared to speak the truth in a space dominated by polite facades. She turned back. I've read every clause in these proposals. One name stood out to me. Heads lifted. Lena raised the folder from the Blue Vine Ethics Fund, a smaller independent fund committed to principles of humane sustainability and non-interference in core values. They're not investing to control. They just want to support tech and infrastructure as long as we commit to preserving the values that brought our customers here. A financial advisor asked cautiously, "But their capital is 40% less than the other firms. Is that enough to scale our systems?" Lena nodded. "Not enough to do what's luxurious, but enough to do what's right." 3 weeks later, Davis Financial's system was upgraded. New data centers were brought online. Transaction response times doubled. The mobile app was redesigned, more intuitive, especially for seniors and people with disabilities. No grand CEO speeches, no flashy ad campaigns, just millions of quiet realizations across the country that there was finally a bank that listened. By year's end, Davis Financial became the only bank to make Time's list of 100 most trusted companies in America, not for revenue, but for having the highest satisfaction rating among minority clients in the industry. New account openings surpassed 1 million. Customer retention exceeded 96%. And most importantly, none of Lena's reform programs had been rolled back. At a national symposium on financial equity, the host invited Lena to the stage. She stood before over 3,000 attendees, behind her a projection of a Davis Financial branch in what had once been labeled a non-viable neighborhood. Lena brought no slides, gave no lengthy speech. She simply shared a quiet truth. "Not long ago I stood inside one of my own branches and was asked to prove who I was, not because of policy, but because of a look. Today I still stand in that same place, but this time I no longer need to say, 'I'm the CEO.' Because at this bank you don't have to be somebody to be respected. You just have to be human." The entire room rose to their feet, not because she was Lena Davis, but because they saw themselves in her story. Back at headquarters, later that day, Lena walked into the very branch where it had all begun. Everything had been renovated: furniture, machines, signage. Everything, except one old brown leather chair where she had once stood, questioned. A young staff member rushed over. "Ms. Davis, would you like us to replace that chair? It's gotten worn." Lena smiled. "No. Keep it. And when someone asks why it hasn't been replaced, tell them. That's where we learned how to start over, with the truth." That night, in her small apartment, Lena opened her laptop. One email stood out. Subject: "My daughter wants to be like you." She clicked it open. A photo appeared. A brown-skinned little girl around 7 years old standing in front of a Davis Financial branch, holding a handmade sign. "I trust my money here, because Mommy said Lena is a fighter." Lena placed her hand over her chest, not out of pride, but because she knew every sacrifice had been worth it. The end of a story, the beginning of belief. Life is not only moved by those who shout for justice. Sometimes real change begins with someone who quietly stands their ground, in a place that they never believed they belonged, and refuses to step back. Lena Davis didn't build a bank to become rich. She built it to prove that fairness doesn't need permission, it just needs to be claimed. And she did that, not with power, but with conviction. We cannot change the world in one day, but we can change the way one person is treated, and from there, the whole world changes, bit by bit. If this story touched you, share it. Not for Lena, but for the millions of other Lenas still waiting, quietly, bravely, to be seen.